So thank you all for coming. My name is Pieter Van Loon. I'm the Forest Program Director for the Vermont Land Trust. And I'd like to welcome you all here. Thank you for making the trip today on a beautiful day. A couple of housekeeping things. If you could, please put your phones on silent so we don't have interruptions during the presentations. The bathrooms are back down the ramp and around to your right. And looks like the coffee isn't still quite ready, but soon I hope it will be. And there's some other snacks up over there as well. So help yourself if you'd like some of that. And I'd just like to thank you all for coming today and sharing your knowledge and wisdom with us. This is really an opportunity for us all to learn from each other. We're all here because we care about Vermont. We care about its forests and its wetlands and rivers. We care about wildlife of all sorts. We care about the health of Vermont, and we're trying to improve that through our work. And we're here because we heard from you all that you wanted more opportunities to get together and meet and learn from other people who are doing this work. A couple of years ago, there were many groups outside of the so-called SISMAs that existed that we hadn't connected with. And so this is another opportunity. It's our third annual gathering. It's another opportunity for us to all get together, learn from each other, meet new folks who maybe are working on something similar to what we're doing, or maybe are working in our area and we didn't even know they were there. So a chance for collaboration. I want to thank Sam Gralty, the events manager for VLT, for running the online portion of it. We have some folks joining remotely. I'd also like to thank our other members of the committee who helped put this together. One is Alex in the back from the Association of Vermont Conservation Commissions, and Claire from Vermont Association of Conservation Districts, and Emilie from the Agency of Ag. And last, but certainly most importantly, Sam Pierce, who is the VHCB AmeriCorps member serving with me in Vermont, lucky me. And she did most of the work. So thank you, Sam. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to you.
Great. Thanks all for being here today. We have so many wonderful presentations that we're excited to share with you all today. And I also wanted to take a moment to appreciate you all and the fact that you are here. And so when I get to a slide that seems like maybe it represents you or your organization, if you wouldn't mind, please standing up and just giving a little wave and then having a seat, and we'll get to see who is in this room today. So we have, if this is you, stand up or give a big wave. Nice. We have some Vermont state agencies. If you don't mind giving a big wave, standing up, hello. From the Natural Resource Conservation Districts, we've got maybe a couple online too.
All right, the video.
Okay. We have many watershed groups and water-centered organizations. Hello to you all. And so many more in the room who are not in any of those other categories. Great. All right. So that's who is here today. And we just want you all to have a good chance to get to know everybody, to notice who else is here, and maybe meet some new partners. With that, I'm going to turn it over to Emilie, who is our first presenter. Thanks.
I was telling Pieter, I apparently like to play risky because I put in a lot of animations in this, and it could go wrong, so we'll see what happens. My name's Emilie Inoue. I'm the plant health team lead at the Agency of Agriculture in the Division of Plant Industry with the Agency of Agriculture, and I just want to give a shout out to my team who is here. There's Judy Kozlowski, who's the state entomologist and state plant regulatory official. Jude, are you around? Can you wave? Oh, hi. Okay. Not anymore. Ben Dillner, who's our state survey coordinator and deals with a lot of the introduced pest traps and surveys. And then we have Stephanie Smith. Stephanie, where are you? Okay. Hi, Stephanie. Stephanie is our assistant director of plant industry. So the four of us kind of make up that core team around the regulatory structure and the surveys that we're responsible for. And today I get to start off with talking about something that has grown into something that feels so much more than work to me. It's a passion of mine, and the more I do it, the more I feel it to be true. And it's something that I want to, continue talking with folks about. And the first thing I want to share is that, can people raise their hand if they were here last year? Okay. So unbeknownst to you all, you were keeping me company this whole entire year. Literally, as I was going around making presentations, this gathering last year is inspiring other Vermonters through collective wisdom. I don't know if you remember, but last year we started with a word cloud that asked people to say, let us know, what are your thoughts when you think of this word, in this topic, invasive species? And this was what happened, and this is what, the collective came up with at the beginning of our gathering last year. And then we talked about language, and we networked, and we connected, and we saw each other, and we realized that each of us belongs to something that's bigger than each of us individually. And we asked everybody for the same reflection at the end of the day. And this is where the collective wisdom is. I am showing these slides in my presentations as I talk, and words aren't even necessary. I don't know if everybody remembers this. And this was not planned at all, and it's beautiful. Because what was disjointed and separate and chaotic became something cohesive, positive, full of possibility, hope. And that had nothing to do with any one individual. That network is all of us. And I think the way I've been describing it is it's a visual representation through language of a heartbeat. This is wisdom that we can all listen to. And I want to thank you all for participating in offering that, because now we get to go around and say, Vermonters, here is what your fellow Vermonters are feeling when they connect and they intentionally change their language and their intention around it. One thing that I've realized is talking is so limited. It's flat. It doesn't do it justice. So over the past year, I've come up with several examples that I think served its purpose without me saying anything. And the first one is an example that has been gifted to us over the past year since we last met. A lot has happened. And there are a lot of examples that we can pull from around the power and the harm and the impact of language. And so this example, I want everybody to just kind of sit back and take a look at. I want folks to see this, the power of framing. The anticipation. Yes, no, this was all on purpose.
Wait,
No. I can see it.
Let's try that again. Hey.
It's okay. It's okay. Just go with that.
Okay.
Okay. So everybody just take a moment. Is it working? Okay. So I'm just going to be silent while you just take a look at how each of these are aiming for the same goal, but in how we view it and are presented with it impacts what our relationship and our orientation and understanding is to the issue. You can take the values out of it, and each one of these has its purpose that it serves, and it becomes about values and what we want as a society. Changing our language doesn't necessarily change the facts, but it really does change the way we experience this world. So one thing that we've really leaned into is this two-eyed seeing concept, which is a concept that was introduced by a Micmac elder named Albert Marshall, who is up in the northern woodlands of what is now Canada. And the main thing here is reminding us that there is so much more to our understanding in our world than just data points, just science. It's not linear. Our life is very dimensional, and we lose sight of it because we stay in our heads so much, and we stay in the intellect, and we forget that there's more to life and more threads of information that we can be incorporating if we're critically conscious. This next slide, I think, demonstrates that visually. So I'm just going to leave this slide up for about 20 seconds. Just look at it. There is no right or wrong here. Okay, and just to give it credit, this is a National Geographic photo of the year. Some folks have probably seen it, but it's a great example of what this two-eyed seeing concept is. Number one, I also want to name and own that we do not have Indigenous representation on our team, so it is not as Albert Marshall actually created, but we are taking the general framework and the concepts and applying it because we as a team bring many perspectives and lived experiences to our work. So I'm not sure what people saw. There is no right or wrong. And so for those who didn't realize that, it was zebras casting shadows, and I will say the first time I saw it, I really did not see the zebras at all. So I was just focused on the shadows and wondering what was happening. And the more I stared at the shadows, the more I couldn't see the thing that was casting the shadow. But because I didn't know what was happening, I didn't have the context to understand this image. But when you realize that, there are multiple truths in this photo, where there is a shadow, that's a truth, and the real zebra is also the truth. So there are multiple truths, but we can't end with a binary. When we have context for the image, we realize in order for the zebra to cast a shadow, there must be light and sun. There must be a source of something else. And we can start building this picture out from its flatness into something that's bigger and includes the rest of the world. And then if we are brave enough to stop and say, well, who took the picture, and we suddenly realized that we've been in this picture all along, and we just never recognize it or talk about it. I mean, it seems so simple, but think about it. How often do you look at a photo in nature and say, oh my God, there's a human right there, through drone or whatever? We're very present, but we don't see ourselves in it. So that is kind of where we landed in how we are operating on our team. We try to see things in a non-flat way, and the language has been the key to creating dimensionality in our work. And today I'm going to be talking and reviewing our regulated introduced plant species rule, which is hopefully going to go into effect mid-July. We're in the final process of submitting our paperwork to the Legislative Committee on Administrative Rules, and it's been a long process. It's been 2 years. And it's not a perfect law or rule at all. I think it's very important to name that. We think it's better than the other one. We did our best to include as much as we could based on our knowledge, but it became very clear in the process that we don't have all the answers either. And this is going to have to continue to evolve as we as a society evolve as well. So what is this rule? The state of Vermont has long regulated introduced species, plant species, let's just leave it large, introduced organisms that cause harm to the state's ecology, agriculture, or economy. And those are very specific guidelines because those are our current collective values. Who manages and who kind of stewards that work? It is found and rooted in Vermont law. That part's boring. It's kind of overseen and stewarded by the plant health team at the Agency of Agriculture. And the focus has always been on trying to limit the spread and the compounding harm of introduced plants. And it focuses on the human behavior in a lot of ways because that's where we have some agency in our human regulations through trade. And so these lists that are associated with this rule has served as a guidance for the public about what is legal and what isn't legal to theoretically move, plant, and do things with. Why is it being updated? Because it's been 14 years? A long time since it was last updated, which also means that the list wasn't updated, hasn't been updated in 14 years as well because of the past structure of how the rule is written. When the rule is attached to the quarantine list, in order to update the quarantine list, we had to open up the entire rule. It is a major process. It costs money, resources. It's not something that is just, okay, let's open a rule and just update quickly. It's been 2 years. So that was an issue that we wanted to fix. A lot of the language and the structure and the framing was reactive. It's not preventative. It's always in reaction to something. And that puts us in a certain position. If you remember back to the slides, that orientation of Department of War or Defense, we're starting off from that starting point based on how we are providing knowledge to the public. And it was confusing, not just for the public, but for those of us in the regulation realm as well. It just wasn't very clear. And so when people called and had questions, we would do our best. And we realized we definitely could do with some clarity as well. First thing that is new is the name. And this goes right back to our language. We know that it shapes how we view problems and how we end up solving them together. If folks remember, the current rule regulating introduced plants is called a noxious weed quarantine. And what we've done is renamed it to be Regulated Introduced Plant Species Rule. And we think that's a lot clearer, and it's more accurate, scientifically accurate. It puts the accountability and the focus on where it matters, not on the organisms who aren't moving themselves. And it supports care-based collaborative prevention. People who have been left outside of this conversation because it's uncomfortable or it hurts to be in conversation because of this language should have a say at the table, should be heard, should be seen. They belong. And we think that this rule supports that. We think the most beneficial part of one of the most beneficial things that we've done here is that we've created and separated the rule from the list, but we still have accountability and a structure attached to how that list works. But with the quarantine list outside of the rule, we can still keep it legal. All the regulations apply still. It's still public and transparent. Nothing will be done behind closed doors. All the information will always be accessible online through multiple, platforms, including our partners. My friend Gwen is going to come up and talk a little bit about the transformation of VTinvasives.org in a little bit, but it'll be up there as well. And the rule reflects a little bit more of the reality on the ground. Nothing is static out there, but these documents are. There's a disconnect with reality and how we actually function in our system. So this is trying to close that gap just a little bit, does not fix it. And as an example, this allows us in our new structure to include and get a plant like kudzu on the list without waiting 14 years. I mean, that says everything, right? So this makes it easier and reflective of what's actually happening. So how is the quarantine list different? We also changed the structure of how the quarantine list works. Before, it was just a Class A and Class B. Class A's, most of them haven't been detected here, and we want to keep them out. So, that's an A, big no. Class B, not weed. All the ones that so many of us struggle with. And if we're honest, at the statewide level, we can't encourage and mislead the public right now to think that it's possible for complete removal of certain species from the landscape. That when we focus on that message, it actually becomes a losing scenario, and it also creates more opportunity for creating harm because we're reacting to something and we're never winning around those Class Bs. It's just a reality. We're responsible for bringing these in. We're stuck with some of these for right now. Things may change at some point, but what we were running into as regulators is people calling us, what is the state doing about knotweed? What is the state doing about, bittersweet? It's fair, but we can't. There are 3 of us who are working, and we're not going to go out and start focusing on removing knotweed throughout Vermont. We can't. And so we decided to help ourselves and the public by creating a tier structure that does not impact the regulatory nature of the plants. All the plants on this list are subject to plant health regulation. You are not allowed to transport them or contribute to their spread. However, we want to set some expectations and maybe some management guidelines that are set in a little bit more reality, so we can set more people up for success. So what we ended up doing is there are 3 tiers. Tier 1 is the ones that are absent, and we have an opportunity to prevent these as long as we all work together and we're aware about it, we talk about it, and we let everybody know that tier 1 species are big red flags. We do not want these. Kudzu, water hyacinth, hydrilla, a lot of these are the aquatics. But it's very important. A lot of this stuff moves through trade inadvertently, but what people don't know what knotweed looks like. So some of these things look a lot like the other to me, especially around the aquatics. Sorry, Kim, that's why we have you. Tier 2, it is the limited category where we think that removal is feasible because it's not necessarily wide. And you know what? All of these are relative terms. We have to draw certain lines, but things like stilt grass and mile a minute, tree of heaven, if you find them, they're not all over the state like knotweed, and localized, very intentional efforts to remove that really could have benefits for the entire state because you could just nip it in the bud at that location. So there will be a tier that clearly shows people where they land. And then there is the established tier 3, where knotweed, goutweed, burning bush, buckthorn, garlic mustard. These are all regulated plants. We do not want people moving them. However, it's widely distributed, so we're encouraging localized focus. And Curt's going to be talking about some of his efforts with his team around really focusing on what the collective or the community wants to conserve. Identify and smartly use your resources with the understanding of the bigger picture. And we don't have an explicit education and outreach part in the rule. However, we have it structurally built in how it functions by introducing a watch list. An official watch list did not exist in the prior rule. This one incorporates an official watch list, which is managed by the Agency of Agriculture. And Ben has been working on that list. There are currently 264 plants, a lot that are not currently regulated, but they are in surrounding states, or there is documentation that there is reason for concern from observations and wisdom received from scientists and other people who are out there and know the landscape and are saying, hey, we're seeing this a lot. We should put this on the watch list. It doesn't mean that people can't plant. There's nothing illegal about moving the plants on the watch list, but we believe that giving the community and Vermonters a chance to make informed decisions before being told no. So this is community over compliance, allowing Vermonters to engage and become curious. And it also gives us a chance to, send an alert out, because all of us are working towards the same thing. So if all of you know certain things, like, watch list plants, talk about them and engage, because that means those aren't regulated yet, but you can help us educate and outreach around those. So that list will be available also when the rule comes out. And then there's an industry consideration here too. We work really closely with the Vermont Nursery and Landscaping Association. They're wonderful, and they're very aligned in this. And we also know that the nursery industry wants to do right by Vermont's landscape as much as possible. They don't know what they don't know, and we can provide that information. And again, this watch list doesn't make it illegal, but it offers a mirror and information where people, if they know about it, they can still choose to, but they should do it knowing what they are choosing to do. It's just about accountability. And I think when people understand what the consequences or the potential harm is, that disrupts it, because people are fundamentally good and don't want to cause harm. So that's the philosophy that we're going off of. The rule also updates in other more kind of basic ways. It's easier to understand. We don't use some of this language that I just never understood. Whereas this, whereas that, all this stuff that was like, why? It's much more clear around what people can and can't do. There will be questions, but we think it's clearer than it was before. And then we've also introduced acceptable management practices, because we work closely with the Agency of Transportation, and we support the Agency of Transportation. They're in a bind. They need to work within a system that requires them to take care of us by maintaining and managing our highways and roads in a way that keeps us safe while we drive. And that's a lot of roadway. And they're limited by our system, so what can we do and focus on in the realm of possibility? And that's focusing on what is possible, not what you can't do. And so we worked closely with Bonnie over at the Agency of Transportation, and we came up with acceptable management practices. And for AOT, these acceptable management practices are their best management practices because of how they function and their limitations, but it allows them to focus on what actually could make a difference. And it also signals through language that in the bigger picture, it's acceptable. It's not the best. So if people want to do more, there are more intentional, intensive ways. But at the bare minimum, this allows our society to function in a way that at least looks at it honestly. And we have a built-in pathway if it isn't possible to, follow acceptable management plans. We're here. We have a permitting process where we can sit down and work collaboratively with people to figure out how can you do something without causing more harm. And just so folks know, the Agency of Agriculture doesn't do all this siloed or by ourselves. The new rule expands what and who we can include. The previous rule included appointees, so it was very limited. This one is an advisory group. It opens it up where we can reach out to more subject matter experts because we need more information and more perspectives to make more complete decisions and informed ones. So as a core, these are fundamentally the same folks that show up in the old rule, and we will just expand on that. But just so folks know, it's not just the Agency of Agriculture. This is a pretty wide group of people who know a lot of things collectively. So the process is we all meet. We actually had a meeting just this past Wednesday down at Marsh Billings Rockefeller National Historical Park. It's beautiful for folks that haven't visited. Steve here. There's Steve. He works there, and it's a really amazing forest where they do a lot of just inspiring work. What we end up doing is, as a group, we meet and then we talk about things and we make a recommendation to the secretary. And this is just procedural. We go back and we say, we recommend kudzu to be included in tier 1. And the secretary says, okay, or whatever they decide. And then it's as simple as that. I mean, it's a simple process that doesn't take 14 years. So what does this mean for Vermont? We really think that it's not perfect, but it is a lot better. And it fundamentally reorients and reframes this to point at the human pathways and our participation and agency and actions related to this issue, which is something that never really comes up. At a recent meeting, a group of us were talking about all these different introduced organisms that we were all working in our different areas. And this image of, think of let's say, a water sprinkler. There are so many little droplets that come out of that water sprinkler. If you're a watering can, that's what I meant, watering can. So what it is essentially when you're just focusing on the organism, which is important. I don't want to, say that that's not important, but we miss the bigger, more important thing. Think of those individual droplets, and we're focusing on each of those droplets. Each of those droplets are introduced organisms. We're constantly just trying to catch these, but the hand that is pouring the water is not even in the picture. So what we're trying to do is reorient and say, look, see yourself as the holder of the watering can, and let's try to figure out a way to manage that a little bit more. It's not going to be perfect. There are going to be a lot of holes, but we need to start somewhere, and we've been missing from this conversation the whole time. And it's important to name that and hold ourselves accountable. Because that shows up in our language. It's not any of our faults. We've been taught that way. But we can do things differently, I think. And the Agency of Agriculture is modeling that. Not just by talking about it. We're walking the walk. And I think that's really important right now. And what's really exciting, it's not just us anymore. There are other people. There are many people that share this value and understand it to be the right way to go. If you look at the trend, I believe this is the way our future, our kids want us to go this way. What we have been doing has not been working. We need to expand our way of understanding and doing things. And that takes humility and a willingness to sit in discomfort and grief, because we cause harm as humans. We are the biggest issues. We are the most serious invasive species. And it's okay. I mean, what are we going to do about it? We're here, we're living. We can be a little bit more present while we live. And to help with this movement and this, stewarding of this message, VTinvasives.org. I'm sure everybody here knows about it. It is the website that everybody goes to around introduced species. And my friend and colleague, Gwen Kozlowski, who works at UVM-Extension and also works closely with the Urban and Community Forestry program with the Forest Parks and Recreation Department of the Agency of Natural Resources, has been leading a website update that will completely rebrand and support this, what we need to do right now in these times. So I'm very grateful to Gwen and her team for really putting so much thought and intention and care into this. And so with that, Gwen, would you mind coming and sharing about the update?
Good morning. I'm Gwen Kozlowski with UVM-Extension and the Vermont Urban and Community Forestry Program. Thank you, Emilie, for sharing this outlined work. I really want to build on your message of framing and changing the language. A lot has occurred in the last year, thanks to this group and many of you participating here today. So building on all this work, we have this excellent opportunity to update and update VTinvasives.org. How many of you used it in the last 3 months? Raise your hands. Last month, raise your hand. The last week? Yeah. So everyone here knows how valuable of a resource it is. And so we have this opportunity to implement some of these incredible changes into our most public-facing outreach and education tool. So websites have a lifespan. It was first established in like 2009, I think. We updated it in 2015, so it's already been over 10 years. And so much has changed in the last 10 years in our dialogue and how we converse about introduced invasive species and even website design. So working with partners from multiple state agencies, and we are coordinating a complete overhaul of the website. This update reflects our shared commitment to improving how we communicate about introduced invasive species. And one of the major components is a name change. So without further ado, coming this fall, VTinvasives will become slowthespreadvt.org. Now, this is so exciting because it's clearer, it's action focused, and it's one of our core messages when it comes to managing introduced invasive species. Now, this was quite a conversation to get to where we are for naming this. This was not done alone. This was done in collaboration with many agencies and many people around the table. Slow the Spread VT just makes sense. I'm excited about it. I think it's a good change and moving in the right direction. That being said, VTinvasives is a recognized brand, and we don't want to lose the access to information from the people that use that as well. So VTinvasives.org will remain active. So it'll be like a two-door system. So if you type VTinvasives.org, it'll redirect you to Slow the Spread VT. That will remain active for an indefinite amount of time as we negotiate this change, because change is hard. So we will have two ways to access the information. So a few of the things that I just wanted to share of what's new and improved with the website. So last spring, we did a survey of over 100 users. And of course, it was made clear to us how important it is for identification and management of introduced invasive species. So with that in mind, the focus has always been to make the process easier for users. Some of the key improvements are pretty significant. So easier navigation, right? Right now we have inland and on water. Those are going to be removed because it doesn't make sense. There's so many clicks. There's submenus beyond everything. So trying to find information will be streamlined. We'll have easier navigation. You'll try to get to what you need easier. Mobile responsiveness. How many of you used the website on your phones and maybe clicked through a species page and clicked like to management, and there's like accordion after accordion? All those will be gone. You'll have information on the page. Enhanced species pages. So we're rewriting every single individual species page. Most of them, or some of them, have, if you've ever used the treatment sheets, which are PDFs that have like incredible information on them about management and timing and specifics. Some of those, most people on the website can never find them. And if they do, they're like several clicks away. So our web developers have really encouraged us for important information to be on the web page. So all of that stuff that's on the treatment sheet will now be on the species page. As Emilie shared the change in regulatory language, all of that language will be matched on species pages. So all of the plants will be listed as tier 1, tier 2, tier 3. And I think that really highlights the collaborative effort and being able to match regulatory language on this educational and outreach tool. Very important and wonderful to highlight the collaboration. Again, it's going to be the same resources, just a different look and easier to navigate. All of this work has been done with thoughtful intention and really trying to improve the user experience. As we navigate this change in language, we're reframing it from invaders to protecting the things we love. So the language will change, but all the resources will remain the same as we reframe the conversation. The last thing I'll end with is helping to spread the word. So this is the first time that I've shared with a larger audience that we're changing the website. We'll be working on a public rollout with more newsletters and information, listed on our the website and all that kind of stuff. But just like Introduced has really spread beyond the initial working group, I think that word of mouth is going to be one of the most effective pieces of change. So if you have ideas on how to share this information, how to share the change, please reach back out to me. I'd love to speak with you. But change is scary, change is hard. But I want people to be excited and aware of this as we move towards the fall. So we're hoping for a fall launch of the new website. So thank you very much.
We have a couple minutes available for questions. Okay, you don't need to take questions. Okay. Yeah.
So not read specialty here. So
Yeah.
that's where I spend more of my time. When you're doing this major change, but then sometimes new information might come up. I don't know how the new thing will be relative to the old, but how do I get a signal that something's changed on a particular thing that you put on, new information or a new treatment idea or whatever? Because I don't go, if I visited the site, I know what you have to say. I don't go back and check every week to see if anything's different.
Right. There won't be any significant changes. I think that the new knotweed page will have all of the different types of methods. Right now, it doesn't have, grazing as an option, or although that will be integrated as a more holistic dealing with smaller infestations and larger and some ideas. So I don't think it'll be new to you, but in general,
Different websites were recommended to go to that I didn't know about because somebody slipped something new on the webpage. And I guess, do you signal that there's something, get it now for a second. Once you do this new rollout, will the material there be static or will it be, updated or change or whatever? And if you change things, how will the user know that they're interested in this change?
generally it'll be static. But we have a newsletter feature that has any big changes. Andrea Shortsleeve did an article for us with the mesh, whatchamacallit, for knotweed. Thank you. So she had done an article on that, and that was something new that we hadn't had on the webpage before. So it was anything new like that will be a news article that will be listed on the homepage and goes out through our newsletter. Jess.
So a couple of questions. One of them is, who are some other voices that were in that list stated? That other voices?
Yeah, our primary was UVM-Extension, Agency of Agriculture. So Emilie's team, Department of Forest, Parks and Recreation, and Department of Environmental Conservation.
Yes, I just want I wonder if they get the other question I had is, how is this, are you working with the people who are crafting Act 59? Because the language in that is that people right now.
Which one's Act 59?
It's one that the housing conservation is traveling around the state trying to get about, and the language is the whole model.
And I think, you know what? I think it's really, thank you. And the more you look, you will realize how rare it is to hear this kind of care-based framing, as it is still at its infancy. So it's true. Most of everything you will see is based in the old framework and the language. Invasive is what you're going to be hearing for a long time. And I think the biggest challenge, at least for me, has been to let go of my own expectations around how this is going to work. Like truly, like we cannot mandate and force change, obviously. How are you going to do that with language police? No. So really, again, doing internal work and saying this is about managing my expectations and doing what I can with holding compassion that it's going to take a long time, a lot longer than I wish it was, but accepting that and being okay with the fact that we're moving slowly, incrementally towards something that is worthy of our effort. So I'm holding all of this with just acceptance and determination to model what I can and what I can do. And I am not in conversation with most of the other parts of the state dealing with all of these other containers. Most of them probably don't even know about this because we are so siloed. So this is where all of us as a community go out and we talk about it and we model it and we show that it's possible. But I want to just say, number one, you're not alone in feeling like, oh my gosh, it's the old framing and language. Get used to it and find capacity in yourself to see it and be something different so that people can see what the different options are. I don't have a better answer than that because we're not in a position to force other state agencies to update and change their language either. Community comments, wonderful. Sure, absolutely. There's something. That's action. Yes, thank you. Okay, out of the hot seat.
So a few years ago, when we had our first introduced species collaborative down in Woodstock, I met this guy named Curt Lindberg who came up to me and said, you know, we've got this group in the Mad River Valley who does a lot of work on knotweed, and we're not really a SISMA, but we're kind of like a SISMA. And since then, Curt has been a really valuable partner, and every time I hear what he and his group are doing, I'm just amazed at the amount of work that they can get done and the amount of energy that they marshal to do the work. So we're really happy to have Curt, Zoe, and Andrea here to talk about their efforts and how they keep their group together and accomplish so much. So thank you so much.
Well, I guess I'll
You have to talk right into it. It's kind of annoying.
self. No. Hello? No.
Get turned up.
Hello.
Start with that one. I'll work on this.
All right. Success. So hi. So great. Ultimately made it here. My name's Andrea Henderson. I joined Based in Conservation in 2023 after an amazing introduction to invasive species from Curt in 2022. So we're continuing on the work with invasive species, not just knotweed, but others throughout the town of Fayston and the Mad River Valley with a wonderful collaboration.
Hi, everyone. My name is Zoe Smiarowski. I am a graduate student in the Field Naturalist program at UVM, and I am by far the newest member of this team up here, having gotten involved only very recently. But I'll be doing my master's project fieldwork in the Valley, doing research on restoration and recovery. Following some of the work, and I'm involved in the qualitative research project that we'll be talking a little bit about today as a research team member. So yeah, excited to be here.
Oh, thanks, everybody. My name is Curt Lindberg, and I chair the Conservation Commission in Waitsfield and work with Andrea and a guy named Pieter Coleman from Warren. And we kind of co-lead the invasive species and habitat restoration work in the Valley. And we're going to do not a presentation, but the three of us are going to have a conversation. We've embarked on a qualitative research project last year, and to really understand what are the social factors that have allowed this effort to grow and improve and sustain itself over time. We actually interviewed 16 people, UVM interns, community volunteers, leaders, our partners from UVM, to help us answer those questions and get their different perspectives on what are those factors. So we have some preliminary findings to share with you today. This is our audio-visual fireworks for the day, so you might want to be kind of referencing this. So,
Kurt, why did you undertake this research?
because we want answers to that question. Like, what are the ingredients and what are the factors that have enabled the effort to kind of grow and I think improve over time?
And Zoe, what have you taken away so far from this research now that you're just joining us with a fresh set of eyes?
Yeah, it's been really exciting to come in and kind of, bypass all the hard work that goes into setting up a research project. But I've been really impressed and excited and engaged by, seeing some of these transcripts, having these kind of conversations, and these themes that you see on the visual fireworks emerge. They really do have so many interconnections, like Curt's, visualized here. And I think part of why I wanted to get involved in the project is represented a lot in some of these transcripts. I think a lot of people feel a lot of similar things around kind of this sense of identity, of place, and wanting to give back, and the quality of leadership that's been involved in the project. After meeting you and Curt and Hito and everyone, there's just this really important sense of mutual trust. And so I think my experience has been reflected in the transcripts that I've read in a variety of ways.
So do we need to say a little bit more about qualitative research and what the process is? Would that be helpful? Or, yeah, okay. So qualitative research is a well-developed research method that seeks to understand like the social factors involved in kind of human endeavors. So it's different than kind of quantitative, traditional, statistically based research methods. So it really features what they call semi-structured interviews. So you talk with a lot of people who have different perspectives, on an issue. You transcribe them. And then our research team, which involves Zoe and I and 3 folks from UVM who are all involved in the Field Naturalist program. And then we analyze these transcripts and draw out what we believe are themes And then because there's 5 of us involved in this research, we bring different perspectives, so we talk through those differences and try to arrive at some significant conclusions that we think are represented in the voices of the people we interviewed. The themes that have started to emerge are on this sheet. So is that helpful? Okay, good.
And I guess maybe, I'll share just a brief story about how I got involved and how some of these, themes have emerged for me. So my initial involvement, like I said, in 2022 as a volunteer with Curt in Waitsfield with the knotweed was an introduction to invasive species. It was a desire to get out there in the community, to become involved since I'd only moved to Vermont in 2020. And then that evolved over time to, wanting to bring that then to my community. I mean, it's one big community, the Mad River Valley, honestly, but, each town is separate, and bringing that to the town of Fayston, helping to sustain and grow this program, and also very importantly, build community. Because we need that. And it's part of sustaining this project, but it's bigger than this project, I think.
So that's one of the themes here in the lower left-hand corner. Is talks about watershed and community identity. So for those of you who know the Mad River Valley, it's a very distinct place, right? Bounded by the Green Mountains and the Northfield Range. So that geography really kind of connects us. So our interviewers kind of said, one, we really care about this watershed, and we also share, we also care deeply about the community, the human community in this watershed, and that is a factor in why we have stayed engaged and got involved, like Andrea's story.
Yeah. So true. I mean, this is the current project that we're working on, but this could inform how we engage with community members in other projects. What do you see? What do you take away from the research in terms of how we can best engage with the community?
Yeah, I guess kind of touching on what Curt was saying, this sense of community and reflecting that. I think some of the initial thoughts that have been swirling about from analyzing these transcripts is that community is both an input and an output. So understanding that, having a sense of community and identity of a place, of an ecosystem, of the plants around you has been a really important catalyzing factor in getting people involved, but then cultivating that sense of community among people who, volunteer or take leadership roles. It plays another role as well as a product of the project. And I think that's not something that, as I have a background in volunteer management, working at a regional nonprofit land trust in Massachusetts, that is something that, really is important in keeping people involved, is allowing for this sense of community. And that arises from all of these other aspects of, learning by doing, like doing things, manual labor outside, that really builds like a bonding experience for people, and having that mutual respect from leadership to think about new ideas and bring new perspectives in, to create that sense of community. So to me, I think initially one of the big takeaways is acknowledging community's role as both an input and catalyst and an output and result of the project.
I think that's a really good point, Zoe. It speaks to the notion of leadership that's noted here, called emergent design. So, we invited the community, and we take a big view of community, people who live here, but also people who care about this. So every summer, we have a team of UVM interns join us. They become part of this community. We have a relationship with UVM researchers and faculty, and 2 of them are here today, the 2 main players. they have joined this community. And so there's different voices, different experiences kind of brought to the table. And with that comes new ideas. And so this notion that some people call emergent design contrasts with the usual way we start a project where we map out a plan, and adopt practices and then try to spread those and implement those. This kind of says emergent design is let's get going. Let's listen to people with different ideas, right? And watch for what emerges. And if something seems promising, let's try it. Because all of you know both these social ecosystems and our natural ecosystems are incredibly complex, and it's never clear what to do, but it become clearer by trying things, right? And then reflecting on those lessons and then taking a next step. So Zoe, does that resonate with you at all, or?
Yeah, and as you were talking about that, I was thinking about this theme of reflection and how that came up a lot in these transcripts, is how important it is not just to do the thing, but to reflect on the thing. And that is what allows you to kind of understand what's going well, what's not going well. And I think there's this element of humility involved in that too, of understanding where things could be better. And again, that mutual trust aspect that, really comes from the leadership and the community members to bring in all these different voices, allows for that process to be so much more meaningful, because
That went off.
I've certainly been involved in projects where, there's one leader who's telling everyone else what to do, and that's the way we're going to do it. And there's very little opportunity for reflection. And in a project like this, as a land manager, it's hard to find the time to reflect. So I think that's been an initial takeaway that I've had, is how important the role of, finding importance in not only reflecting, but celebrating on progress and the building of that community that keeps people involved and allows you to be adaptive and understand where changes might need to happen, but also to celebrate where things are going well. So that was
So I'll just share an example of the humility in the learning process. So the first year, as I said, I was a volunteer. Curt has developed this loyal following of volunteers, like the Pied Piper, really. And they show up, rain or shine. I mean, Curt generally calls it off if the rain is expected on Thursdays, not Thursday. I was confident we could replicate that in Fayston. We had pretty decent success year 1 in 2023, year 2 in 2024. For Fayston, interest dropped off significantly, I'll say, with our Wednesday work days. So I did a little learning, a little humility, and year 3, 2025, we just, we reduced the number of Fayston work parties, and we had, far greater turnout, also added creamies into the mix, really whatever it takes. But, I have enough humility to recognize that, maybe we don't have quite the strong level of interest and following that Curt's developed. And so, we adapt and, we'll get accomplished what we can get accomplished. So, I'm grateful for a little humility.
Zoe, I have a story about reflection. 3 years ago, at the end of the intern season, before they go back to school in, late August, Ashley Cray, who was our intern coordinator, she sends me this 2-page report. And she had not been asked, but she interviewed all the interns and asked them what really worked, what should be sustained in this effort, and what ideas do you have for making, this work on invasives and restoration better. I was just blown over. She took the initiative. She obviously cared. She wanted the opinions, of her other UVM interns. And so now that's become a tradition. So each year now, the interns kind of gather at the end of the year and they reflect and they share that reflection with us. And each year it improves the effort. So I almost fell over when I got this precious gift, from this young college student. So.
I guess we'd like to put it out there then also, to everyone here in the audience, if you have any reflections on what you're hearing here, experiences you've had, with your community volunteers. Does anyone have any thoughts? Or anything they'd like to share?
I really appreciate your approach. It's neat. It's like the second presentation that's had the word humility in it, which I feel like is such an important value for this work, as well as the reflection, because we can get so much into the doing. We had a lot of work parties for our projects, probably 30, and we did not have like a long debrief at the end. And especially for our seasonal volunteer crew, I'm realizing like, wow, that would be really wise, because a lot of the people then went out in the community and tried to do this and ran into big obstacles and weren't able to continue because the whole system. So yeah, thank you.
Thank you.
I think one of the findings from this research is that, and that's suggested by all these lines, that these are like not independent findings, but these themes are closely related and kind of work together. And I think an example of that is this notion that the volunteers and the interns and our advisors talked about feeling respected, honored, and listened to. And what that accomplishes, it allows for all those diverse ideas, and perspectives to be heard and used. So if they didn't feel trusted, they're not going to speak their ideas. They won't be listened to. And, we won't have the benefits of their expertise and their knowledge. Andrea mentioned, or Zoe mentioned before, that some of these are like kind of inputs, ingredients. Some of them are like outcomes. So feeling respected, being fulfilled in the work are like these emergent outcomes, but then they also become ingredients. Because if I feel like I'm heard and respected, and I see that we're making a difference and being fulfilled by that work, that sustains me deeply, right? And that's why I keep going. And that's why other people have said that's why they stay connected to this work. So, think about, the connections among these themes. I don't know, Zoe or Andrea, what about that?
Yeah, I absolutely agree. I think we have another.
If you have the list of questions that you included in your survey, I can kind of generalize about what questions you probably asked, but I'm wondering if there was a very specific list of questions.
Yeah, yes, we did what are called semi-structured interview questions. So they're open-ended. And they were things like, why did you initially get involved in this work? What have you noticed? What has this meant to you personally? What ideas do you have? So there were about, 10 different questions. And, we could share those if there was interest in people, and kind of maybe send that around. But semi-structured suggests that we want to cover this territory, but there might be responses that warrant further investigation. So if the interviewer heard something really interesting, they're encouraged to kind of go off and explore that, because there might be some kind of fertile, new insights from that. So.
So I guess another, question as we, wrap it up, like from the learnings of this work, are there one or two or three, possible things that we really need to focus on as we continue to, continue this program and build it within our community?
Go ahead, Zoe.
I mean, I think for me, the thing that excuse me, the thing that jumps out to me the most is this kind of aspect of leadership, and something that I've had discussions about with some of the fellow people on our research team is that it's not just having a leader, it's who those leaders are and how they choose to, connect with the community that they're working with. It's important to have someone who's able to provide some structures and schedule volunteer days and kind of build that camaraderie. But, we've talked a lot about kind of this decentralized system among, the 3 towns involved in this and the conservation commissions that allows this to kind of move and flow and have this structure that just is really open-ended and brings a lot of people in. So I think that's really important. And the partnership with UVM, I mean, I'm part of the partnership with UVM now, so I don't want to, but I think that's been really important in kind of this lens of applied science and bringing in, Noelia and Mariano, the interns, Walt Pullman, who's my program director, and Hans with the extension team at UVM, allows for this really fantastic, bridge of ideas of you have people who are really interested in community building, and you have these, researchers who have a lot of knowledge, applied knowledge of how to structure and, make meaningful sense of the work that we're doing so that, you're engaged in management, but then we're reflecting on that, and there's some, scientific component to that. So I think that's been really an important ingredient of all this.
That was one of the biggest themes we heard, and we called it, we have it under diversity. It talks about intergenerational. The energy that gets developed with community members working side by side with the young UVM interns is magic. The interns feel it. They feel blessed by getting to know people in the community and working on something we all care about. And the members say, my God, they bring us hope. They're bringing fresh ideas from what they're learning in school. That nurtures us. That sustains us. And so as a result, after that theme, comes out, we're saying, well, how can we do more of that? So Noelia and Mariano now are going to be teaching in some science classes at our local high school. So we'll bring in even younger people and perhaps their families. And so that's another we didn't have that in our plans, right? But the idea emerged from reflecting, and this whole research project, qualitative research project, is a serious effort to kind of reflect and learn. One other thing that I think we tend to neglect somehow in our efforts is collecting data. And with Noelia and Mariano, they've helped us develop a system to actually batteries, huh? Halfway back. So, we now have, I think, 90 measurement plots set up around the valley. So we're seeing what's happening, both with knotweed management, but other invasive species, and the return of some native species. And we use that data and reflect on it to inform what happens. So our work was initially focused just on knotweed. It grew to look at restoration, what next. And then finally, from the data, we saw that to get better at this work, we need to be sophisticated in managing multiple co-occurring invasive species. So that has become really a new theme in our work in the Valley, and it comes from data, science, and then reflecting on the data and asking, what does this mean for us? So. Goutweed, given a little more sun, it was growing in conjunction with the knotweed, getting a little more sun, boy, it just explodes. Typically behind knotweed stands, we find honeysuckle, right? So the interns did some research last year, and now we're experimenting with means for managing honeysuckle, and buckthorn is another kind of common one. So. Not in a big way, but we have to have one of the other a field naturalist student or graduate did a survey of, I think, 16 different locations across the valley, 3 transects, each looking for other invasive species. So we have a pretty good idea of what's there and what's significant. So we have 1 minute left.
I just think I want to kind of emphasize that working with introduced species is a really complex thing to navigate, just like emotionally. And so I think one thing that's really stood out to me about this project and why I chose personally to get involved is that there were people who were willing to navigate that complexity and acknowledge that they might not have all the answers. And I think that came about in the transcripts, that came up in the transcripts a lot, is just the value of providing space to mutually navigate this complex relationship of this social ecological system that, we're all engaging with as people who, care about the environment. And so having people who are willing to create that space and have those conversations that are challenging and, examine your relationship with the natural world, that's really been an important ingredient too, because it's always a challenging topic. All of my cohort mates are like, Zoe will go work on the introduced species. We're gonna go and work in the wilderness area for the summer. So, it's not always the glamorous work, but it's important and engaged relationship.
Thank you.
I'm not going to speak long. I'm introducing a colleague from the Vermont Department of Fish and Wildlife. Danielle is a state lands ecologist, and we're really excited to have the opportunity to learn from somebody who deals with large areas of the state, sees a lot of different things, works on a lot of different projects, and comes with her own set of lived experience and wisdom. And I haven't had the privilege of actually hearing Danielle speak yet, so selfishly, I'm really excited. I haven't gotten to work with Danielle as much as I would like, but hopefully we can change that. But Danielle, welcome.
Okay, now I'm good. Okay. So Emilie, thanks for the introduction. My name's Danielle Owczarski. I work as a state lands ecologist. So that's across Agency of Natural Resource Lands, which includes lands owned by the Department of Environmental Conservation, lands owned by Forest Parks and Recreation, and Fish and Wildlife. Those are wildlife management areas, state parks, state forests, riverbank access areas, and even areas where we have flowage rights around dams. It's over 360,000 acres of land across the state. We have district stewardship teams that serve on these different districts, 5 across the state, but I'm the one person who's kind of doing the ecological work, doing the natural community assessments, rare plant surveys, project reviews, things like that. So what you're looking at here is 4 different mission statements of the agency, the overarching agency, Fish and Wildlife, FPR, and DEC, the Department of Environmental Conservation. And I wanted to start with this because this is essentially why we do the work we do. And there's a lot of different activities that happen in order to meet these missions and goals. And one of them is introduced invasive species removal and prevention. I obviously am not doing this all on my own. I generally am not the one who gets out there and gets my hands dirty. So I'll talk to you about some of the folks that do that. But I do want to say that I started my professional career working out in Oregon at Toketee Falls Ranger Station near Crater Lake. And my job was to do invasive species removal, Scotch broom and giant knotweed. And it was all remote. We had funding because it was actually the power company that brought the invasives in and introduced them. And so they actually provided funding to do the removal, which was kind of amazing. We don't all have that luxury, right? So who do I do this work with? I work with a lot of folks, like I said, the district stewardship teams. So that includes, each team of the 5 includes foresters, wildlife biologists, watershed planners, parks managers, fisheries biologists, recreation specialists, and then me as the ecologist. We also work with partners. So those are non-governmental organizations, nonprofits, other federal and state agencies. I'm assuming there are folks in this room that have worked on agency lands or have worked with some of our partners. Could you raise your hand if you have? Any folks? Okay, great. I know that we've worked with many partner groups on state lands doing removal and restoration. And then we also work with volunteer groups, schools, and local groups as well. And the photo you're looking at is of the Narrows Wildlife Management Area. If you've never been there, I highly recommend it, although you definitely need to make sure you have tick protection. It has the highest density of rare, threatened, and endangered species in all of Vermont. It's lovely. It has the eastern rat snake, and if you're lucky, you might be able to see it. It's a very docile snake and very beautiful. And we do treatment in this area, and it's really crucial to protect those species. And we have generations of staff to carry on this work. So the woman pictured is Lisa Thornton, and she's a retired forester, and she worked with school groups on Lake St. Catherine and Bombazine doing garlic mustard removal, obviously mechanically, and took those kids out every year. And now Kyle, our new forester, is doing that work with her. So this is fringe gentian. It's in a rich fen in Whipstock, WMA, that's in Bennington, Vermont. So we have a process, and our process is mainly developed so that everybody can provide feedback to projects that come through state lands. So that's every type of project. So that could be creating trails, that could be putting in new infrastructure, doing vegetation management, and things like invasive species treatment and removal. So we have a database where all those projects go into. Every year we do a desktop review of all those projects as they come in. This year I had around 290 projects come in, and probably about 50 or more were invasive species projects. Once that's done, the annual stewardship plan gets approved, and that basically has my notes that say, this project looks great, I'm familiar with it, go on ahead, or this site may have some sensitive features, so let's go out on the site together, look at it, see if we need to flag anything or change the way we're doing the treatment. And then we go out in the field to do that work. And then the folks that I work with, my colleagues or the folks they're working with, will do the treatment. So that's basically how our process works. And that's to protect these rare species and rare natural communities on state lands. So what I want to do now is talk to you about 4 different staff members that I work with and the work they do. And hopefully you can relate to some of this work. So Aaron Hurst is a forester out of District 1, which it covers Winsome and Windsor counties. He works in wildlife management areas, state parks, and state forests. He's been working, he has 16 plus years of experience. He's a licensed applicator in categories 2 and 10. His favorite project, which that was funny, was all of them. Every non-native plant removed is a positive result. And that's because to Aaron, and I know this from working with him in the field, that wildlife habitat is really important to him. So making sure, and we're talking, you know, not just about the fuzzy, you know, megafauna and things like that, or even just birds. We're talking about all the insects and other critters and fungi and plants that rely on this habitat to survive. And he's really also into supporting the native vegetation on the landscape. And one of the things that Aaron highlighted was that it's really tough to find people willing to do this work between chemical exposure, hard physical labor, and he says terrible working conditions. And also the seasonality of the work, right? You're not working all year round. That he feels like there's a small people who are willing or able to perform the tasks, and that the prices have increased quite a bit also as a result of this. So the photo that you're looking at, Aaron's kind of in the corner, the background photo, and he's walking through Lowell Lake State Park, which is in southern Vermont. And the photo next to the text is a selective herbicide application photo that Aaron worked on. The next colleague I want to talk about is Travis Hart. So he works in the Rutland district, and he manages 16 wildlife management areas in that district. And something I think that's important to point out is that folks that are working in the south and also kind of in the Chittenden County, Addison area have much more of a challenge than folks that are working in the Northeast Kingdom and some parts of central Vermont, where we don't have as much of these populations in those areas, especially within our properties. Travis is also a licensed applicator, and Travis is really good at plant identification and helping to develop projects associated with that. And it was interesting as I came in, I was hearing the story about the questionnaire and asking folks who do the work, like, you know, what is it that you're feeling? What's the experience you have? And one of the things that Travis had said is like, he really appreciates the progress, seeing progress over time. So Whipple Hollow and Whipstock Hill are these southern units, and they have a lot and all different types of introduced invasives that have made it into those areas. And so he's really been focused on that. And then he also works with NRCS. So he's seen really successes in seeing like actually lowering densities over time. And so that's him doing work, helping to aid folks and doing this on private lands as well. And, you know, promoting the regeneration of native forests, also helping them with vegetation management. But he's really excited to see the transformation. And I love it. He says like impenetrable invasive plants. And that's where I think when Aaron says terrible working conditions, those sites that are just socked in and like you can't even walk through them, you know, during the summertime, and actually being able to do treatment over years and see that change is pretty impressive. And then why does he continue to do the work? Because, and I think it's interesting because I think most of the folks really align with our mission is, you know, he wants to see the most benefit to the largest diversity of species. Like that's the focus. It's not just eradication. It's actually really making sure that knowing that we're not going to be able to get rid of everything, you know, into the future, how do we manage in a way that we know we can still support our natural systems to do their work, and thinking about the generations to come, as Travis has 2 young children. So my next colleague is Toni Mikula. She works out of the Essex district, which is in northwestern Vermont. So that includes like Chittenden County and Franklin County. She's also a licensed pesticide applicator. One of her projects, or 2 projects that she's really excited about, is almost a complete restoration of beneficial native plant species through the removal of Phragmites and then also knotweed as well. And she works in these areas that there's a lot of development around the sites. So they're not these really large units like with acres and acres. And so the photo in the background is a Fairfield Swamp Wildlife Management Area, and that's a intermediate fen. You can see all the cotton grass in the background. So these are the types of communities we're preventing from getting that sort of creep going on into these special places. And then also the soil, the photo of the soil you can see on the ground, there's a post, which is an auger, a metal post, and then there's this light colored soil, which is very sandy. So these are sand plain soils, which is a very rare community in Vermont because most of it has been developed on in kind of the Chittenden County, Franklin County area. And so this is one of those areas that Tony has been working on, making sure that we can help to maintain and support the native plant population. And then the picture next to that is glade fern, which is an uncommon species found in Fairfield Swamp and rich forest, which can be ripe sites for introduced species to move into. And then the why, again, I think it's really aligned with our mission, is to preserve ecological integrity of the areas that she's working with. And then the last staff member, the last colleague I want to talk about is Chris Bernier, and his project has been really interesting. So he manages Windsor Grasslands Wildlife Management Area. I don't know if folks are familiar with that, but it's in southeastern Vermont. And that unit was actually conserved specifically for grassland and shrub habitat for birds. And what Chris has been working on for the past, I'm not sure how many years, but is the removal of poison parsnip, chervil, and then every shrubby introduced invasive you could think of that really don't provide good habitat and forage for both grassland birds, so bobolinks and savanna sparrows, and then old field birds like blue-winged warblers, eastern towhees, and field sparrows. And so he's been able to work with the Ascutney Mountain Audubon Society, and for the past few years annually has had around $10,000 to $15,000 to work on this. And he still feels like he's struggling to get it to the place where he wants it to be and continue the maintenance. And so one of the things that's interesting, you know, in the challenges of these treatments for us is that we're always thinking about, you know, should we be doing mechanical? Should we be doing chemical? What are the pluses and minuses? What do we have for resources to do this? And in this case, the mowing timeline for birds are after August, when the parsnip and chervil's gone to seed. So you can see how, like, there's a conflict right there. Like, they're trying to conserve this type of habitat for these grassland birds, and at the same time trying to make sure the grassland doesn't completely turn into chervil and poison parsnip. And so Chris has to go and hand pick everything earlier in the season before they go to seed. And he's been doing that for a while. And one of the other challenges I know that he faces is just having low survival rate of plantings. So when they do the treatment and then they go and they do plantings, that's been a difficult thing as well. And that the treatment that he does is really integrative. He does contractor treatment in-house. So that's like our staff doing the work, chemical and manual removal. And I don't know if anybody can relate to this, but he said it feels like playing whack-a-mole. So I can just like picture the parsnip, kind of, you like pull one and then another one pops back up. So he did just finish a phased shrub habitat project where they worked on 2 different areas to stagger disruption to the habitat while the birds are using them, because if he removed all the shrub habitat, the birds wouldn't have anything to come back to. So they did it in a phased kind of stage effort. And to date, over 130 birds have been observed at Windsor Grasslands WMA. So if you're into birding, that's a great place to go. And then I asked folks about, you know, what methods of treatment do they use? So in general, they're kind of evenly hiring contractors, doing in-house applications. They're also almost evenly doing chemical and mechanical removal. So I'm guessing that probably has to do with resources and the type of sites they're looking at. And then I know that we have one person, but I know Chris also works with partners as well. So the funding sources that we're using are generally like state funds, which is districts have a certain amount of funding they put in for projects, and then there's the folks who decide whether those projects get approved. They work under various grants, habitat stamp funds, so that's a fish and wildlife fund that we have, natural resource conservation service funds for the environmental quality incentives program and the conservation stewardship program. They use other federal grants, and then Fish and Wildlife has a memorandum of understanding with Forest Parks and Recreation, where when they do work, it can provide match to us for the funding that we get. So you can see there's a little bit of gymnastics that goes on for funding. And then in terms of challenges, you know, stuff that my colleagues have mentioned is like having this need for long-term monitoring. So like doing the removal and then having the ability to actually go back and monitor them, having sustained funding, which I'm sure we can all relate to. And I think that the state actually has a pretty good funding mechanism compared to when I used to work with volunteer groups or nonprofits doing this work. It's quite challenging. And I don't know if that's changed at all. Availability of contractors, having enough time and capacity to do the work. The treatment is really labor intensive, and that staff who maybe used to work with it are kind of aging out of it and sort of being like, this is too much on me. That there's, injury risk and other demands too of like what we're supposed to be working on state lands. And then just in general, like we just know that it's just sort of expanding, it's traveling, it's moving, and making sure that we're doing the right things to keep an eye on it. And the picture in the background is actually an old forest at Wrightsville Reservoir, which is in Montpelier. And you might not know it's there, but you have to kind of like paddle across the reservoir and then climb up a hill, and there it is. It's small, but it's quite lovely. So proactive management, that to me is like one of the most important things that we can do on our state lands, because we're doing the treatment, we're doing the work, but how do we not just continue to introduce stuff? And so we wrote the planting guidelines for the Agency of Natural Resources lands. So that's been really helpful in helping our staff know, like, when they're doing erosion control or landscaping, that one, we should be checking in and really thinking about the seed mixes that we're getting and the plants that we're bringing in, and really focusing on trying to plant native ecotypes if we can. And that's something too that I feel like is getting better in Vermont, and we're really seeing a change in, is that these plants are actually becoming available. There's been funding for people to grow them. It's pretty amazing and wonderful. So I'm really glad that that's happening right now. And then we use standard language for contractors. So when we have mowing or vegetation management contracts, so you can imagine if somebody's coming in with equipment and they're mowing, stuff gets stuck on the equipment and they can spread it into the units. And I've seen this, and not generally, we get a lot of land that we get from somebody else. So they will do a big logging activity, and then they will, we will buy the land from them after that because it's not as useful to them. And then we start to bring it back to health. But I will see when I'm out kind of in the middle of nowhere, here's like, a small population that was spread by a machine. And usually at least we can get those and, feel a little bit better about it. But we also have the issue of roads. We had an issue where we had a contractor, it was the Agency of Transportation, who was coming in and said, hey, we can mow on one of your properties for you for 2 years, until you find somebody else. And they actually were mowing on the edges of the roads, and then they came in and brought the material, the poison parsnip, onto the property, and now we're managing it because of that. So you can see how these little things can really have an impact. And so making sure we're thinking about that is really important. Project review is a big part of it, just making sure a lot of different people kind of have eyes on things, and we help remind each other to think about it, because it's easy to forget when you have all these different sort of things going on. We do outreach to our staff as much as we can. And then, of course, early detection and rapid response. So Noah Hoffman has come to our district stewardship team meetings. Our forest health staff come whenever we have new pests or pathogens that are introduced to the forest, and they educate our staff. They tell us how to identify them and then how to report back on them. And so that's been really helpful as well. So this picture here, of two folks, one of them is me, one of them's Emilie Meacham. She's one of the forest health foresters. We're at Roy Mountain Wildlife Management Area, and there is a stand, red pine woodland. They're very rare in Vermont, and it's an old forest stand, but it's actually dying. We're not sure why. It could be an insect or, environmental conditions. But we're probably gonna lose it. And so things like this, where you lose a whole canopy of a place, you want to make sure that the understory, that we're making sure that that understory doesn't have introduced species that are going to really proliferate and grow and take over that place and outcompete some of the native species. So I think this just gets back to our mission. Like, this is really mission driven. This is why we do this work. We have a lot of different things to worry about, but I think this is one of the larger issues that we have in terms of managing. And then you can see these beautiful spring ephemerals. And these are some of the plants that are generally at risk and will have a harder time competing against, shading and really even earlier growth, which is kind of amazing to see all the honeysuckle right now on the sides of the roads that it isn't as obvious, in the fall time. So that's it. And if folks have any questions, this is the Little Otter Creek Clay Plain Forest. And adjacent to there is where they did a treatment for removal, and it was really important to protect this clay plain forest because it's just such a great place to live if you're a plant, any type of plant. It's Roy Mountain Wildlife Management Area. It's in Barnett, near Harvey's Lake. Yep. Yeah.
We're talking about public lands. How has either Fish Wildlife or others addressed, like, folks who are coming in public lands, hunters, fishermen, hikers, folks maybe bringing things in on their boots or their equipment or whatever? Has there been any concerted effort, do you anticipate any concerted effort to educate the public in general about invasive and introduced species and how to minimize the spread?
Yeah, we haven't, as far as I know, and I don't know if you know of anything, but I don't think we've really done any concerted effort, especially thinking about things like state parks or at trailheads. Like, I've seen, I don't know if it's like National Park Service or other places around the country where they'll have like the foot kind of wipe station, and then they'll just have a little bit of information about it. But we haven't done that, other than like sort of like when we're working with contractors or if people are doing landscaping, things like that we're sort of making sure, and then working with our staff, like the state land managers for the parks. That's kind of the path we've taken so far. Yeah. Yeah, that's a good question. Yeah. Yeah. In the back of the room, is there a question? Yeah. It's a good question. I know that we've had people who lease our land use animals, and then I've worked with private landowners who've used animals. And I don't know, it would definitely come through the stewardship team if somebody sort of made that suggestion. And I'm just trying to think of, like, nobody's really come to us about it. Usually it'd be something like somebody like you or somebody that that does that would come to the state and say, hey, what do you think about this? And then we would bring it to the team. But there would definitely be a lot of sort of questions around what does that mean? And but I think it's something we're kind of open to any type of approaches that could be effective and are manageable for us. Yeah. So thanks.
You don't have a shepherd on your team?
No, that would be cool. Yeah. Yeah.
The slide that you use for the types of method of treatment, you had different categories. One was that you hired out, contracted, and within, I'm just curious that within that, the contracted purview, how much of that was chemical treatment versus mechanical treatment?
I think it's,
I felt like the slide was perhaps a little misleading in that it showed only 25% was, a chemical application, but really.
oh, and it was 25%, I think, in terms of like looking at the things that they said yes about. I mean, it's just me putting together a list and saying, hey guys, tell me what you do on state land so I get a general idea. I would say that most of the contracted work is chemical. It's possible that we would do contracted mechanical, and that could be like, I'm thinking of a place like Kingsland Bay Natural Area where I think we're going to potentially be working with a local group on that. There are a lot of rare plants there, and there's even a rare snowberry that looks exactly like honeysuckle. So that's an issue that we have, is plants that look alike, and making sure that our contractors have the ability to tell the difference, because there's the introduced bittersweet, and then we also have a native bittersweet that's uncommon, and it's difficult to tell the difference unless it's flowering. So you could see that we run into those issues, and that might be where we would do contracting with mechanical, and then we make sure that the contractor also has the ability to do the plant identification.
Danielle?
Yeah.
You had a resource up there that you created, the planting, is it the planting guide?
Yeah,
I'm just
yeah.
wondering, that's available online for people, is that correct?
Yes. Yep.
So I think that might be a resource.
Yeah, if you're interested, it's, we specifically wrote it for agency lands with the understanding that, boy, wouldn't it be great if other folks could find it useful? So we tried to write it in a way that it would be useful. Yeah. So I think my time is up. You can, well, I mean, you could, if you write planting guidelines for A&R Lansdowne, you can just type that into your Google search bar. Otherwise, it's on like some documents page on state website. I don't know if you've ever looked through state websites to try to find things, but that'd be great. Yeah. And if you have any feedback on it, we plan to like update it, and things get old. So love to hear any feedback too. But thanks, everybody. All right. We have some flash presentations next from 3 different presenters. We're going to welcome up Jess, Rubin first, and we're going to go through each of these presentations before answering questions. So we'll welcome all these presenters back up at the end so that you all can ask questions of all of them once they've all gotten a chance to present. So I'm going to welcome up Jess Rubin next.
Okay, so I'm a restoration ecologist and educator. I work for UVM ALE department and also Microevolve and Ecological Resilience Service. And today I'll just be offering a little glimpse into this innovative and effective non-chemical strategies for restoring a degraded into multifunctional riparian forest buffer at Shelburne Farms. This project has been going on for 7 years. And the photo on your right, on your left, is a degraded riparian buffer, primarily Rhamnus cathartica, common buckthorn. And the picture to your right is the next spring after it was restored with native polyculture riparian plants. So only going to be sharing a tiny bit about the project and happy to connect more. I'm focusing on the star of the project in this presentation, Rhamnus cathartica, known as common buckthorn, and really appreciate the framing of this conference about language and just kind of referencing some other books people may be aware of, Rethinking Invasive Ecology by Tao O'Brien, and also Invasives as Medicine by Timothy Lee Scott. And just remembering with humility that like these plants are carrying medicine of today's age and we don't even know, right? Because geologic time. So with that lens, I'm going to talk about, from our experience, why Rhamnus cathartica indicates degraded ecosystem, and came over in the mid-1800s, right, from husbandry folks. And what we've found is just looking at the habitat, that they're really The beautiful flowers, which you'll see in a couple weeks, they're quite inconspicuous, so keep your eyes out. They do provide habitat for native bees and butterflies and some nectar insects, but it's only for 2 weeks, which is quite short compared to a lot of native pollinators. The birds are laxative, AA cathartica, so not really providing nutrition. The early growth shades out ephemerals. There's not really a diverse understory comparing to our plant surveys. We've counted about like 11 to 15 species. And then, of course, if we gather phosphorus uptake data, which is our first objective of 4-objective project, if you can see here, the y-axis is phosphorus concentrations, and the x-axis are species. So elderberry, meadow willow, red osier dogwood, and arrowwood, buckthorn in the control plot is a lot less phosphorus uptake compared to these other plants. And the red and the green, those are just different restoration strategies we could talk about another time. So we feel okay for removing it, even though we make offerings with humility, but it is worth noting that, you know, great firewood and potential inoculation, folks at Interville are working on that. Definitely effective hedge grow. And if you're thinking of these multiple ways of looking at things out of the scientific box, a lot of spiritual qualities in like Nordic and Druid traditions. So I'm going to share something that may be controversial in this room. And just kind of from our experience, we feel that there's no need for glyphosate even on many, many acres in removing this species. This also can be applied to Lonicera, some of the honeysuckles, of a non-chemical mechanical strategy. And I just want to shout out to one of my long-term mentors, Mike Bald, in the back of the room of Got Weeds. If you don't know about his many strategies, quite an innovator in this field. So the technique I learned from Mike 7 years ago, and we've applied again and again, works every time. 3 times in 2 seasons cut, so you cut it belt height so you don't trip on the plants. And then you strip back that regrowth, so you can see this regrowth coming up just, you know, quick with a hand scythe, chop and drop. And then these stumps provide habitat for overwintering invertebrates. You can see these Termites came right in, and early migrant birds. If you're not familiar with glyphosate, it's a complicated compound that has phosphorus in it. And so it's just worth noting that it actually can increase phosphorus cycling in soil and water and increase phosphorus saturation in affected soils. So therefore, when you're in areas uptaking phosphorus from legacy phosphorus, which a lot of lands in Vermont have, that's no longer available because of the glyphosate's presence. So in an ecosystem with eutrophication, I think avoiding glyphosate, if you can, might be preferred. This is just a snapshot of the plant palette that we replaced those species with, multifunctional, which I can talk to you about at another time. And then just to consider, if you have a lot of acreage and you're intimidated by, you know, the potential of having a lot of work parties, you could rent an excavator, which I did for half the plots just to like get the metrics on it. And it takes 150% less time, but has, you know, barely any of the educational value. If you want some metrics with that, in 3,120 square feet, it was 273 people hours by hand. That same amount of square feet, 3,120, took 180 people hours with the excavator. So you just need to still pick up the trunks and the crowns, and then of course decompress the soil if it's Covington clay, which this was. And this is just a snapshot of what those areas look like once they were restored. But we actually think that you probably don't need to remove the stumps, and that 3 times in 2 season technique works just great because the plants just will regrow around it, and we can plant quite close to them, and that creates a much slow the spread, like, you know, change. I just want to mention that standing on the shoulders of a wonderful team of both funders and organizations, scientists and collaborators and community, as well as Abenaki. And just to mention that if people do want to come out and see the site, these are 2 official tours, June 6th, Pollinator Celebration Day at Shelburne Farms, and also through the Society for Ecological Restoration. You can find that on our website. It's a QR code for our INAT project. And I have to just mention this. My team said, make sure you mention that we need more funding. So there you go. I said that. But anyway, thank you so much. Yeah.
Next up, we have Joanne Garton, who's going to tell us about black ash stewardship. Here she is.
touch this thing, it's that.
Oh, that's that.
Wait.
Hi, everyone. My name is Joanne Garton. I'm the community forester with the Urban and Community Forestry Program, which is a partnership program under Vermont Forest Parks and Recreation and UVM-Extension. And I wanted to take a quick moment to speak about black ash trees specifically. If you're thinking, gee, I thought those were native, they are. We're talking about it in the context of emerald ash borer introduced beetle that is feeding on and killing all species of ash trees in this region. So you'll see kind of a high level overview of a lot of things that we're working on in the forestry division. I am by no means the leader or the only spokesperson, just someone who is able to get up and say a few words about this work today. So why focus on black ash? It's a really important part of several key natural communities: red maple black ash seepage swamp, hemlock balsam fir, and black ash seepage swamp. Essentially anywhere your feet are wet and your boots are potentially filling up with mud while you're standing there, there may be some black ash growing. It is, back in the evolutionary chain of ash developing as a genus, black ash is not as closely related to our other native species here, green and white ash, as it is to Manchurian ash. It's more genetically related to Manchurian ash, native to Eastern Asia, where Manchurian ash co-evolved with emerald ash borer. Here, black ash ended up in what we call North America now and did not co-evolve with emerald ash borer and has extremely little resistance to the larvae and the feeding activity of emerald ash borer. It's highly susceptible to decline and mortality from EAB. And without a lot of proactive management strategies, we're looking at almost an extirpation of the species on the landscape. Culturally, it has huge significance to all the peoples who are indigenous to the range of black ash, from the Midwest up to Newfoundland and around here, certainly to the Abenaki people who've used black ash splints for years, still do, for both decorative basket weaving and utilitarian purposes. And it's also, of our native species here, the green, white, and black ash, it's the least abundant. So at the forestry division, we're kind of have a 5-pronged approach, I guess, to trying to talk about, raise awareness, learn more ourselves about black ash as this species that is changing quickly right now as emerald ash borer progresses through the state. We're talking about black ash, we're also listening. You probably all have many stories about black ash in your world, whether in your forestry, your plant world, or in some other kind of cultural context that you're a part of. We're identifying sites where we can treat black ash with a systemic insecticide to kill the larvae that are in the tree and save individual black ash trees as long as that treatment continues. We are the entity that's able to apply for, obtain, and release parasitoid wasps, which are biocontrol for emerald ash borer. We're able to do some identification and harvest of a small number of black ash used in black ash splint pounding workshops, which are incredible ways to spend your time. And lastly, participating, being one cog of a bigger wheel of all kinds of folks interested in black ash seed collection. So just touching on each of those with a few pictures and a few more details, we received a small grant to do some black ash treatment. So again, it's not an inoculation. We're not injecting the tree with any kind of disease to protect it from bigger disease. It's an actual insecticide treatment into the trunk of the tree. We were able to treat 6 sites last year in 5 counties. These are sites with healthy black ash stands, may already be infested, but are overall okay. They're alive enough to treat, 10 to 20 trees per site, and we'll be in 8 more sites again this year. There are many more viable sites and not enough money or person power to get to them, but it gives us an excuse to go look at some beautiful, beautiful species of black ash stands. I mentioned the biocontrol. These aren't available on Amazon. This is something you have to go through a fairly regulated process to obtain these biocontrols. They are parasitoid wasps. So a parasitoid it's a species whose eggs or larvae develop within another insect. So in this case, it's an EAB egg or larvae. It's fascinating. The pictures are wild about how these parasitoid wasps reproduce successfully on EAB larvae and eggs. And there's several sites since 2020 where these releases have happened throughout Vermont. We certainly were not the first. The first releases happened in 2007 in Michigan. And that happened after about 5 years of research as to how do we know what these parasitoids are going to use? How do we know it's effective? And the real struggle, honestly, is actually making sure that the wasps live. They need emerald ash borer to live. And so you're only able to use that approach where we already know there's extensive emerald ash borer infestation. This is a couple of photos of how they're delivered. It's fun to receive your parasitoids in a UPS box and take them out into the field, whether in a bolt of wood where they emerge or simply in a plastic cup where you kind of shake them out and come back to monitor for years. Last two, I did mention these splint pounding workshops. We've held, I think, four so far. We hope to hold 2 more this year. The next one is in Hardwick on September 25th. It's a really magical way to appreciate this tree in a new way, or perhaps not new to you. It's a lot of work. There's definitely a bottleneck in going from harvesting a black ash to having splints that can be stored for future generations. But it's really brought us together. So many people who maybe otherwise would have never met if not for emerald ash borer infestation. And we've really been learning a lot about Abenaki culture, about cultures of peoples all throughout the region, and then also how our own cultures maybe get to play a role in this story. And touching just quickly on black ash seed collection, there are a lot of ways to think about the future of ash in the landscape, and seed collection is definitely one of them. Last year, we started partnering with folks at the Northwood Stewardship Center and the Intervale, who are phenomenal seed collection people. A group of us gathered actually just last week at the Smoky House Center. Rose is here if you want to speak to her about Smoky House, and kind of had a refresher training and also a big brainstorm of how we're going to do this now while black ash is here. Black ash are dying, all the ash are dying quickly, black ash especially so. For our team, Forest Health Specialists, Urban and Community Forestry, we're looking mostly at collecting seeds that are then dried, stored fairly quickly, and sent to a long-term storage facility in Iowa that are then open to the public to ask back again for their research. Tons to know about that, and it's pretty incredible regionally what folks are working on. This is my contact information and a link to a webpage. I'm, again, by no means the only person working on this. Noah and Danielle are here too from Agency of Natural Resources, but I do love talking about it, so catch me at lunch.
Thanks, Joanne. Next, we're going to hear from Neal Maker about his Phragmites project. Welcome, Neal.
Hi, I'm Neal Maker. I am on the Calais Conservation Commission and talking about a project that we're doing in Calais just north of here. That's really a project of the Lakes and Streams Committee, which is a small group of really dedicated volunteers. And I think this is probably a common thing, a couple of people who have been dedicated and thinking about invasives and working on it themselves in Calais. And we just recently started partnering with the UVM Ecological Protection Laboratory, Ecological Planning Laboratory, who is bringing some capacity and helping us do this better. And this is an image of Phragmites I took yesterday in Calais, kind of a full of native species wetlands in the foreground, and then the golden, tall, beautiful grasses in the background, Phragmites. I think that's a red-winged blackbird's nest from last year. They love Phragmites, but we're hoping to keep it from spreading into these really diverse wetlands we have, which there are a lot of in Calais and are some of our richest ecosystems. So, there are a lot of introduced species in Calais, not as to as great a degree as other parts of the state, but we're choosing to focus on Phragmites because it's still manageable. There are these distinct populations of it that we can handle with the kind of limited volunteer labor and resources that we have. And we feel like it's doing a lot of harm to wetland ecosystems when it spreads into them. It can really displace a lot of native plants. And then also the lakes and streams folks have been managing it and keeping it where it is and preventing it from spreading for years by cutting it every year. And so they've kind of held that space for us to learn from what they're doing and keep working on it. This is a map of all the colonies that we know of Phragmites. There are 15 of them, and about half of them are along Route 14, which is Calais' one state road and gets by far the most traffic. And they're almost certainly spread by road equipment along Route 14. But the point I want to make is that it's not equal. And the places that we are really paying attention and that I think matter the most are places where it's poised to spread into bigger, healthier wetlands. And that slide that I showed at the beginning is one of those. I was standing in the water just upstream of a culvert. And, you know, if the Phragmites spreads down through that culvert, it spreads into a big, beautiful wetland beaver flow and could do a lot of damage. So places like that are kind of have gotten the attention. And so we're at hopefully a turning point now, trying to bring more energy into this project instead of it just being a couple of volunteers shouldering what feels like a burden. We're trying to bring it to a place where it feels like a community endeavor that's shared and that's hopeful. We're Mad River Valley Initiative wannabes. And so we're kind of in that place of like just starting to think in a more organized way and wanting to get to that place. And bringing a kind of experimental mindset to this, exploratory mindset, getting better at monitoring and paying attention to what has been successful and what hasn't. And that's where the Ecological Planning Lab is really going to help a lot, I think, bringing some of those tools from the Mad River Valley and adapting them for Calais so that we can actually see what we've done and how it's made a difference. And then there's also this outreach piece of it, trying to widen the circle and bring more people in. And we just got a Vermont watershed grant that's helping us put out a newsletter that will reach all the residents of Calais. We're going to put up signs where there's Phragmites along the roads. So hoping to draw more people in and build some excitement and widen the circle. And then being really open with all the things that we don't know, which are a lot. And some of the hard things are human things, like how do we work with road crews and with neighbors and take this shared problem and make it tractable. And that gets to my final point is that it's this, right? It's this landscape scale problem at the watershed scale. We're in the Kingsbury Branch watershed in Calais. Woodbury's to the north of us, East Montpelier's to the south, and we've kind of been in our little silo doing our thing, but really this is a problem that affects all of us. And so that's one of the reasons I'm here, is to like make those connections. And if, you know, other people are working on Phragmites and want to talk to me or compare notes, that would be great. We're hoping to kind of find out what neighbors are doing and figure out how to work with people.
Yeah. Can I get Joanne and Jess up here as well? And we have a few minutes for questions for these three.
So for Neal, the question is, when you're doing manual cutting of your Phragmites, when do you do it and what do you do with your Phragmites?
We have been doing like just cutting and leaving stalks there And in this kind of narrow window, and I forget, but and I think late July was kind of the time where it's less likely to spread it. And I know that that's an important piece of it, is the timing of it. But it's also been when the people who are involved have the time and, oh my gosh, hasn't gone to seed yet, and like, let's get on top of it, and it hasn't been consistent. And so that's one of the things we're hoping for, is to start paying attention to that kind of thing more carefully. And we have done some removal of the material in places, but in a haphazard way, kind of when we had the capacity and it felt important. That picture at the beginning was in that place. The Phragmites has kind of made it through the culvert under the road to that big wetland in the past, and we've responded much more carefully, trying to get it out of there, because that's what. Yeah. No, we haven't done that. Yeah. Is that a thing?
The idea of introducing this moss, but it makes me cringe because it seems like so many other plant species that have been introduced to take care of something turn into a whole nother problem of an introduced species that doesn't have any native predator and that sort of thing. Is the introduction of the wasp in part because of the urgency of needing to try to get a handle on things?
So the question was about, if you introduce a wasp to parasitize a non-native insect already, are you snowballing into a new set of problems, essentially? And that's a good question, and certainly one that many people ask. The introduction of this parasitoid wasp, and I am speaking as someone who's read about it, not someone who's spent their career on it, so I'll defer to any other experts in the room, but it wasn't rushed. It was something where the emerald ash borer was identified in Michigan in the kind of late 90s, early 2000s, and coming up with options for biocontrol took years, and it took bringing in insects that scientists knew were able to parasitize EAB larvae and eggs, and then testing them it took about 5 years to get to the first 3 species that could be released among all the species that could be introduced as biocontrol of EAB. So there was a process of, basically introducing these wasps in controlled environments to different types of agrillus beetles, so the genus of emerald ash borer, seeing what happens, giving the wasp choices in a variety of ways, and making sure that their choice was emerald ash borer larvae. Is there some risk of other types of beetles being parasitized by this wasp? I mean, yeah, we can't bring risk to zero, but ultimately, over these years of study, it was found that the risk of that happening, of a different agrillus beetle being predated or parasitized in such a large amount to make an impactful difference, was far, far, far smaller than the impact of using this biocontrol to control EAB. So that first release happened in Michigan in 2007. We now have a 4th species available, but I think it was like 2015 or so before that same rigor of testing had happened to find a 4th species. Part of our issue of releasing parasitoid wasps in Vermont is climate. Many of them can't survive cold winters. And so the species list that we're left with here are ones that are generally able to overwinter in our climate. So it's a great question, and I think it's always worth not just accepting sort of, well, it'll be fine at face value, but it certainly wasn't something that was rushed by USDA APHIS. And the reading about it is pretty fascinating, and I would definitely from there defer to these people who spend their career on this type of research. So I hope that helps shed a little information, but it's ongoing research for like reading for me too. It's a great question. Yes. For black ash treatment, probably.
Yes.
Yep.
Yes. Is there seed collection? Is there a program where volunteers can help collect seeds? Or that's not something
I don't know if Rose made you ask that question because that is a great question. There is a volunteer network. Excellent. Well, let's chat a little further. We were just meeting about that last week at Smoky House Center, which is down in Danby. But the idea is not only are different land managers keeping eyes out on their lands that they manage, whether it's state or private or wherever, but that this is something that volunteer networks, private landowners can do. We've got a couple of seed collection kits that we can loan to you. So let's just connect with that after lunch. It's not, black ash doesn't seed every year. And so that's another reason to kind of be trained up and ready to go when we look at the next mast year, which could be this year, it could be next year, we don't know. But so black ash are dying so quickly that we can't always wait that 5-7 year rotation and hope that the trees are still alive. Yeah, it's very doable and we would love to help. Yes.
I'm just wondering, so do you have an integrated investment strategy? Drop injections. I'm wondering how long the injections are viable for. And then if you have to wait till that sort of runs its course before you release the loss. So you've got paralyzed some.
So the question was, can you do an integrated pest management strategy to both be treating trees, releasing wasps, managing everything at the same time? Right. And how are the trees in Michigan doing? The trees in Michigan are not doing great. There are large stands of dead ash of all species. There are some survivors. There are some survivors of different species in one more than others. It's certainly not tied up in a neat bow of how the end story of emerald ash borer rolls out. But yes, you can do integrated pest management. Yes, we're actually doing that on state lands. Danielle mentioned the Narrows WMA. That's a place where we have treatment happening of black ash, so systemic insecticide. We recommend using insecticide with either emamectin benzoate or azadirachtin as their active ingredients. There are others, but those are the ones that we recommend. And you need to be there every 2 or 3 years to keep injecting them. If you stop injecting them, they become susceptible again to emerald ash borer. The wasps can only live with emerald ash borer eggs or larvae. If there's no emerald ash borer, they have nothing to reproduce on, so they will die too. And so you end up doing these types of multifaceted treatments in these stands where you know there's emerald ash borer. And that can be, you've seen it, which is not too hard these days, you've seen the impact, or it's very nearby and you have a good sense within 10 miles that the infestation is nearby. So yeah, multifaceted and kind of complicated for sure, but doable. So can we roll back the injections as the wasp becomes more or viable or established? I hope so. I think we don't know enough yet about the survivorship of the wasps, and there will be kind of a peak of EAB and a peak of ash mortality, and then everything will start to calm down. We're not at that point in Vermont yet, but I think that we will be able to start to manage some of those multifaceted, like, it's not sort of switch on forever. We'll be able to switch things off. No idea of a comment to add?
Stabilization of the DAB populations. Our injected trees are really like a source for future ash. Those trees themselves may not live, into the future, but get reproducing ash. It's not just about protecting trees themselves, but they're.
Can I have one quick question for Jess?
Yes.
You just, when you do your cutting your
Buckler? Great question. Yes. So the first cut we put in the field and then we chipped it up and use it for pathways. The second and third chop and drop, just like classic permaculture, just it goes back into the soil. March. Yep. Like end of pruning season. Yeah, March. Yeah. Cut once, belt tight before the trees leaf out. March, April, February, January, go out in your snowshoes. And then depending on your season, I usually do June first cut is, when you see them growing abundantly, and then maybe right when things start going senesce in like mid-August. Third. And then the next year, 10% will come back. Do it again. Next year, you just have the stumps. Yeah.
Yeah, go for it. I think I remember on one of your slides you said that the understory doesn't come back because there's an effort of something. Then you said do a restoration. The killing of the trees do effective enough.
Yeah. So interesting question. So this presentation is on a restoration project at a farm where we replanted, but some of my clients, I do this for them who have forests that are overrun and have gone back to those forests year after year, and kind of what one of the presenters talked about, Danielle covered, where they see forests return. I've definitely seen that in forests where you just cut back and 2 or 3 years later, some forest plants are showing up. Yeah, yeah.
Okay, great. Thank you all.